We have started the YouTube live stream for anybody who is trying to watch us.
Okay, good evening. Welcome to the July 14th Comprehensive Rezoning Update Task Force meeting. We'll open with a roll call. Al Nickerson?
Here.
Bill Norris?
Here.
Sandy, can you hear me?
Bill Sutton? Brian Greenwood? Buck Nickerson?
He's not here.
Okay. Chicky Shawani?
Here.
Cindy Ganther?
Cindy's here.
James Saunders? Joe Hickman?
Here.
Pat Engenfelder? Paul Ruby?
Here.
Jim Shogi? Tom Nason?
Here.
And Tyler Brett.
I'm here.
Great. So this evening, Bill sent an email, and we're going to try to create a little more efficiency in the meeting. So we set forward some norms. I'd just like to read them so that we're all on the same page. If you're joining us for the first time, these are just some norms that we're asking everyone to pay attention to so that we can move through the agenda. So if you want to speak, please speak through your chair, and that means raising your hand if you want to speak and waiting for me to call on you. Please don't interrupt other folks that are speaking. Please don't talk or debate among yourselves. Please respect others' views and keep your contributions short and to the point. We will start and end on time. We take a brief agenda around 7. And if you're online or on the phone, have your video on, please, and have your mute on, and wait for me to call your name before you unmute. That way you won't have any background noise. The other thing that we're going to try to do this evening is to, when we have a comment period, usually the task force speaks first, and then we're waiting until the end of the meeting for public comments. We're going to just incorporate public comments after the specific items that we address. That way the public isn't speaking about something that happened like an hour ago. So that should also facilitate the discussion. And I think as Bill has set forward in his email, our purpose here is to have a fair and open discussion. So everyone is encouraged to share their ideas open and freely, recognizing that there's no right or wrong inputs for our discussion. The other thing we just wanted to be clear on our process. We're having a discussion about the proposed text amendments, and during the meeting, staff will be taking notes and will summarize kind of the input from the task force, and those summarizations will appear in the meeting minutes. And a summary of the discussion will then be used when we get to the second stage, which is actually drafting a proposed text amendment. Bill, do you want to add anything there about our process?
I think you nailed it.
Okay. Okay. So with that underway, the first item is we have 2 sets of minutes. So we have June 9th and June 23rd. Are there any corrections or additions to the June 9th meeting minutes? Anyone on the phone or online? Okay, if hearing no corrections or additions, we'll accept the meeting minutes as submitted. Um, Moving on to the June 23rd meeting minutes. Are there any corrections or additions to those minutes?
Madam Chair, I have one question on page 2, where it's referenced in italics, the correspondence from the town manager, that came, milling the town manager. That was sent to us after the meeting, so that's now being incorporated into these minutes, is that correct?
I think
I think that's why it was
entered
entered as being a note and then italics, to make it clear that it's something that happened after the meeting.
Okay, I just was making sure that that was the purpose of that. Okay.
So also with that, excuse me, following up on what Pat said, that confusing part was Kirby requested these comments made now public record. Is that comments from? So we're making the attorneys requesting these comments to be part of the public record.
My
My
recollection is
recollection is that
at the time
at
of
the
the
time of the
meeting,
meeting,
Mr.
Mr. Mackey
indicated he had met with the town
from
Ms.
Ms.
Manning,
Manning,
and I
and
think
that's actually what Mr. Kirby was going to
He
say.
may have
He may have something in his public setting.
The intention of the note is just to set the record straight about what occurred, not to address Mr. Kirby's request. The idea being that if following the minutes in the process, it would be a little confusing because at the time of the meeting, we didn't have that information, and that information came in and it sort of corrects what I said in a sense. So that's why I wanted to do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the June 23rd minutes? Okay, hearing none, we'll accept the minutes as submitted. Sam, welcome. So any item under old business that we need to discuss?
Yes, Madam Chair. At the June 23rd meeting, Jamie Williams made a presentation, and there were some follow-up questions asked, and I believe she wants to address some of those issues this evening.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So because details and words matter, I just want to clarify a few items from the last meeting. I said in my presentation, and it's on page 5 of the 2017 Economic Development Strategic Plan, Kent County will prioritize high-paying jobs with low environmental impacts. Data centers are not a one-size-fits-all. We visited a data center in Bethesda, and it was 10,000 square feet, and it was co-located with professional office buildings and included doctor's offices. So there are different types of data centers. The water usage is all part of the, and if there's not an adequate water supply, then the project could not and should not be approved. That is not part of the land use ordinance, in my understanding. That's water and sewer and the health department. And there's other regulations that have to be approved through. Many of the industries listed in the target industries are ag farming components. Data centers, cybersecurity, training and education centers, and especially environmental services and transportation are ag-related and farming businesses. So I want to make that clear. The overview on page 3 talks about Kent County having some of the best agricultural land on the Atlantic seaboard and the high-quality environments and appealing rural character. So in reviewing the themes and strategies, ag and farming is addressed. On page 13, it says we want to attract agricultural related industries that provide job opportunities for county residents and support the diversification of the agricultural industry and use raw materials from area farms. On page 15, the plan states to identify and promote the availability of sites for development of co-packing centers to leverage the availability of products from the Eastern Shore Entrepreneur Center's F3, which is Farm Fish Food Initiative, and their program, and promote the development of a program focused on the agricultural and maritime heritage with displays, activities, and tours on a year-round basis. Using the Sultana, the Museum of the Eastern Shore Life, and the Crow Farm as models. And promote tourism and outdoor activities as economic development assets by leveraging the quality of the county's natural resources to attract businesses and residents. So the ag industry, just for the record, is the only industry that Economic and Tourism Development has requested funds for a grant program in my 10 years with the county. In partnership with the Upper Shore Regional Council, we provided grant funding to local agricultural businesses looking to expand, diversify, and improve their marketing efforts or conduct agricultural research initiatives. The purpose of the program is to help support the development, expansion, and coordination of agricultural enterprises and initiatives within Kent County. So the program launched this year. It was very successful. We had 9 applications, 6 were approved for funding, and we partnered with Marbidco to allow entities to do larger projects. And the Kent County Commissioners, as well as the Upper Shore Regional Council, agreed to fund that project again for FY 2022. Yes, we do get excited when there's interest in Kent County. That says that our marketing efforts to get Kent County noticed are paying off. And the county is getting a return on their investment. So yes, we will celebrate that every single time. It's not my job to approve or deny the project. It's my job to get Kent County noticed. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that James Saunders has joined us. Hi, James.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, thanks. Any other items under old business? Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Bill to go through our new business, first being the task force questionnaire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For you tonight are the questionnaire results. The department received 14 questionnaires, a tally is attached, and a summary of all the written comments received. For the 14 questionnaire, there's a total of
James, can you please mute?
Okay.
Mute your microphone, please. Thank you.
For those 14 questionnaires, there was a total of 220 answers of yes, 81 answers of no, and 216 answers of discuss. So the discuss answers were distributed such that there were 4 threes, 6 fours, 12 fives, 9 sixes, 7 sevens, 1 8, and 1 9. What all that means is that there was a lot of discuss. So as shown on the tally of responses, 10 of those 40 questions received limited requests for further discussion. And staff recommends that those items that received either a 3 or a 4 be eliminated for the future schedule for discussion. I would remove 10 items and leave 30 items for further discussions. Happy to entertain any questions or folks want to discuss any specific comments. What staff plans to do is, as we move through these, we will refer back to these comments and the questions raised as we prepare staff reports to try to address some of those questions if we're there.
Bill, just a clarification, the comments, were they all the comments or select comments?
All the comments.
Oh, really? Okay.
So,
Thank you.
and I think every single survey had at least one comment on it somewhere. So I think everyone made a comment somewhere. And I would say the only issue would be there was a few things that we couldn't transcribe. So if you see a dash or just a line, that means we weren't able to translate that one word. So usually it doesn't seem to interfere too much with the meeting. So. The range of answers, it seemed like there was a fairly wide variety. There wasn't a lot of answers that one or the other. It was fairly evenly distributed across all questions.
Any comments or questions for Bill on the questionnaire?
Yes. The one question I have, does that mean that everything that didn't have a line drawn through it, there's 10 items, and we're not moving forward, everything else will come up for discussion at some point or another?
Yes.
And some of these things we've already discussed, and that I see we have check marks next to them.
Right, so they've already been on the agenda for.
But will they ever be discussed again, or can we not bring them back? Because the one I'm questioning is the Millington discussion occurred before we got that letter. And I have floating zones, and I think that should have some further review since we've seen that letter.
Okay, we can schedule it.
I mean, I don't think we should say, oh, we talked about it, yeah, we talked about it, but we didn't have all the information. With that letter coming to all, and then we've all reviewed, that changes some of the thinking I was expecting.
Okay, and I'm happy to introduce that to one of our agendas in the future.
In the future, yes.
I have to say, my takeaway from the meeting where we did discuss it was, I felt like the direction or the general sentiment of the task force was that if the town of Millington was not supportive of the proposed amendment, the task force was not comfortable supporting it as well.
Okay.
So that was what
Well, I just want to clarify that, we have to come to some kind of solution. Okay, that's all.
Would it be sufficient then to include that in the minutes for the next meeting, just so we have it, and maybe we don't have to discuss it further? Yeah, that would be. You can just put that as a summary item. Great.
Thank you.
Okay, and next up is the schedule. We're trying to undertake to get through all the items.
Yes. So last week, the Board of County Commissioners approved a revised general schedule. The goal is to break the project into its two largest components, the zoning text revisions and the map changes. There's an attached calendar and schedule, and the calendar lays out the zoning text process from July to March of 2022. The goal is to get to the end of our discussions in March, and then staff will file legislation. That legislation will move forward to the county commissioner on the text only, with the goal of that being adopted in the fall. In July of 2022, the county will again include a letter in the people's tax bills to alert them that the mapping process will begin in the fall. Therefore, by October, property owners will be able to review the final text and select a new zoning district if they so choose. I think that was sort of the sticking point in this process. It's difficult to make a request for a new zoning district if you don't know what that new zoning district may entail in full. So we're breaking it into two parts. The first part will run through October of 2022. Then we have to, anyway, package everything up and send the entire text to the Critical Area Commission. It's usually around 6 months to review. During that time, we can work through the mapping requests. And then when that returns, then we'll be able to file another bill in April of 2023 to address all the changes required by the Critical Area Commission in the text and also all the mapping that we've gone through for 6 months. So that legislative cycle for mapping and the Critical Area Commission will then be expected to be completed in September of 2023. So that is the overall big picture. You have a calendar attached which runs through the March 2022, which is the process for the zoning. And then following that, there's a detailed schedule which goes over each of the items for discussion running through October, with October 27th being the public forum. This is where if an item is ranked with a 3 or a 4, it's stricken through. The goal for staff will be to, as Chair mentioned, is to try and capture the discussion in minutes, and at the end of each item, come up with a sort of concluding point that the task force direction was as follows. That'll be in the minutes. You all have an opportunity to review those and see if we got it right. And then those conclusions will then allow staff to take action to either include text in the future land use element for your all's review or not, or modify text, depends what it is. And then a version of that land use text with specific text changes will be presented to the task force in November. I'd like to point out that on page 17, which is page 3 of the schedule at the very bottom, there's 3 items for elimination. Those probably take a little explaining. Just want to mention one of them, the P8 has already gone through a separate process an applicant applied, and that's been, that particular addition to the code has already been adopted. For both P11 and P12, those are public requests that really are best suited to a map change and not a text change. And I understand that P12 got 9 discuss mores, and we understand that the task force wants to discuss and review subdivision density standards in general in the code, the density of all the districts. So, but this was a specific request for a specific zoning district related to a map request. So we think that that in itself can be eliminated because that'll be handled in the map portion. And then we will be having discussions of density, especially in AZB and some of our other task force items. So that's what that issue is about there. And of course, we don't have to follow that. We want to make sure that what we've laid out is something that the task force is comfortable with doing. At this rate, we'll have somewhere between 3 and 5 items for each meeting. Hopefully that'll keep us on course through October.
Thank you. Questions on the schedule? Bill, I have a question. When we advertise that we're having a zoning meeting, will it include the topics for discussion now that we have them?
Generally, I've been including sort of a summary, like the title of the day, like the environment,
right,
or countryside, etc. So we could certainly advertise individual specific items if that's the desire.
No, as long as there's some indications that are interested parties.
So they know what the topic is, yes. Okay, thank you.
Any comments or questions on the phone or online?
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're moving through things quickly, so we'll hold our break. And why don't you jump right in? This is adding accessory dwelling units to the village zoning district. Is that you, Carla?
That is me, yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
So when
This came up, we're going to do our initial review, quite a bit of discussion. And in the staff report, I was trying to point out that the village is the only residential district that doesn't allow accessory dwelling units or accessory apartments. And I provided you with the standards that we use in sort of the residential district, the accessory dwelling unit, and pointed out that in sort of the intense village and commercial district, we call it either accessory housing or accessory apartments, and we really don't have any other requirements. And then noted that in the resource conservation district, accessory dwelling units are more restrictive due to some requirements in the temporary law. And so this request by staff is that accessory dwelling units be allowed in all appropriate zoning districts, that they can serve multiple purposes, they can allow homeowners to age in place. I know we've had at least one instance in the county where a landowner built a smaller house for themselves and let their son have the larger house, so that they could all kind of stay on the property. They can also provide living space for adult children who are starting out, or for elderly relatives who kind of need some assistance but don't actually necessarily need to be in assisted living or a nursing home yet. And they can also increase affordable housing options in communities because they do provide important rental opportunities that could be lacking. And so I think that I quoted sort of a statement from the comprehensive plan that says continue to allow the creation of accessory dwelling units in specified zoning districts. And I think that was pretty clear. Even in the comprehensive plan, it was assumed that accessory dwelling units are permitted in all of the residential districts. And so I think it's appropriate to make sure it is added into the village district.
Thank you, Carla. Task force of comments or questions?
I have a question.
Please, Paul.
Yeah. Question I have is there going to be any kind of minimum acreage or whatever, or lot size for these? Because a lot of the lots in the village district are quite small. If you're trying to put accessory units in, you're going to run into problems with septic systems, wells. If you're adding at least one bedroom, one bathroom, you're getting into designs of septic systems and everything else. You don't have public sewer in most of our areas.
Right, and that would all be reviewed as part of the building permit, and if the health department doesn't approve it, then no, you can't have accessory dwelling unit on a particular property. I don't think we should be as concerned with minimum lot sizes because an accessory dwelling unit can be an apartment over a garage. So you could add a second floor to an existing garage to make a dwelling unit out of it. They could put a small addition onto their house, and it doesn't have to be a standalone dwelling. So it's easy to accommodate on a variety of property sizes, and again, it's not everybody's going to do it. Not all properties will be able to have one. But I think that it is an important option to allow, just like some of the other uses in the land use ordinance. Not all properties can have a particular use. Either it's not large enough, or it can't meet setback requirements, or the septic system doesn't allow it. So I don't think we need to be thinking that narrowly.
Thank you.
And I guess maybe one thing I would add is that, as I noted in the staff report, some districts do have like 7 or 8 conditions for somebody to be able to have an accessory dwelling unit. Such as the property owner has to reside on the premises, it has to be subordinate to the principal dwelling, in both size and appearance. That it can be rented, but it can't be sold as a separate unit. Whereas the intense village, commercial, and commercial critical area, and village probably would fall in as well, allow for accessory housing or accessory apartments without any other conditions. And I think in those sort of more commercial type districts, it's meant to be if you've got a business on the first floor, where you can live on the second floor. Or you could rent, you don't have to live there, you could rent it out. So I mean, it's not, that might be a discussion to have is village one of those districts where we need some more kind of conditions we use in the truly residential districts, or should it be more open, like in the districts that allow more commercial uses?
Thanks, Carl. Any comments or questions from anyone online or on the phone?
This is John Leisinger in Chesterville. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Well, I don't have a comment as best I can follow. My problem is there's so much ambient page turning and other sounds that I can barely hear the discussion at all. I'm trying to follow on the phone. If anything could be done about that, I'd appreciate it.
I don't think we can do anything about that.
We can try to make sure we speak louder.
Yes. Yeah.
Is Is there a number of, a count of accessory dwelling units in the county that we have so far? Is that tracked? Or I guess building permits issued for accessory dwelling units?
It's
It's
not
not
easily
easily
tracked
tracked
because
because
when we
when we
first
first
started
started to
to issue permits
issue
for
permits
them,
for
we
them, we
didn't
didn't
always
always
get a
get a
good
good
description
description
in the building permit
application,
application, and
and
many
many
times they
times
were
they were
treated
treated
just
just
like they were
as they were
single-family
single-family
residents.
residents.
Um,
Um,
we can
we can
potentially,
potentially,
um, through the
through the
assessment
assessment
data
data that we have available, we can find out how many properties have more than one dwelling on them.
but that's
But
going
that's
to
going to
capture
capture
sort of
everything.
everything.
So
So
that
that
might
might
be
be
a
a
farm
farm
that
that
has
has
two
two houses
houses
because
because
there've
there's
been
been
two
two
houses
houses
there
there
for
for
100
100
years,
years.
or it could
Or
be
it could be
somebody
somebody
who
who
has
has
built a house
built
in
a
the
house
last
for
20
years.
years.
Right. And have we ever, as a staff, have you gotten any complaints about accessory dwelling units?
Not
Not
to
to
my
my
knowledge,
knowledge, we've never had complaints.
More
More
often
often
than
than
not,
not,
we've
we've
had
had
complaints
complaints
from or
or
dissatisfaction from
dissatisfaction from
property
property
owners
owners
who
who have
have difficulty
difficulty
trying
trying
to
to
comply
comply
with
with
those
those
requirements.
requirements.
One of them is
One of
that
them is
like
that
parking
like
has to
parking
be in the
has to
rear
be in the rear
yard,
yard.
and so
And so
sometimes that's
sometimes
been
that's been
difficult.
difficult.
I
I know we
worked
worked for a really long
for
time for somebody who had,
um, their
their house was far from the road and they wanted to try to put an accessory dwelling unit between their house and the road, and there were stipulations that it has to be in the side or the rear. So sometimes those kinds of issues come up.
Can people apply for variances when they run into issues like that?
That is an interesting question. Um, and would probably take some research.
To
To determine if it's a variance of sort of the bulk standards or if it's a variance of the use. Because Maryland doesn't allow use variances. And so I would have to do more research and maybe even consult with the staff.
Well, it seems like nobody has a problem with allowing accessory dwelling units within this particular zoning district in question. So I personally am a very big fan of accessory dwellings. Do we want to broach the subject of making the construction of accessory dwelling units easier? So when it comes to, say, applying for a variance, so if you have a long driveway for that accessory dwelling unit closer to the road, or if you don't necessarily have a land configuration to put the parking in the rear, right? Would that be worth discussing more? Because in terms of small lot sizes where you're not necessarily going to get the approval from that department anyway to add another sink or what have you, that's kind of built into this process already. But for some of our, I guess, maybe larger lots or lots that are strangely configured, do we want to make it a little bit more flexible to construct an accessory dwelling unit by giving them a means to apply for a variance if they run into any particular issue?
I guess I'm just to piggyback on that, Sam. I'm wondering if, like Paula mentioned at the end, should we think about other conditions?
I will say I listened to a webinar on sort of the evolving regulations for accessory dwelling units last week. And it seems the trend is to make it a little easier and more flexible because it is recognized,
Like I said,
like I said, as being a way to increase affordable housing. And I think many of you would recognize that that is an issue in Kent County. So it's definitely something to consider. And I noticed that Cindy has her hand up. I don't know if she has a question or a comment.
Sorry, Cindy, if I didn't see you.
That's okay. I just wanted to make a comment and say that I support adding accessory dwellings as in the village zoning district. I think there are enough checkpoints along the way and criteria that must be met before this could be approved. And I think there's for a particular instance. So I'm very supportive of this, and I agree with the comments that we should be able to provide this flexibility to our property owners. That's it.
Bill?
I would tend to agree with Cindy and in favor of Sam's comments.
So Carla, do you think there's something we need further discussion here, or is it something staff could try to address, that flexibility and?
I think we can address, I think what I'm hearing is that, accessory dwelling units in the village district should have, conditions similar to what are in the residential district, but that we should look at these conditions to see, to make sure there are ways, to have flexibility if needed. Is that?
Yes. Great.
I think that gives us enough to work on.
Okay.
How much actual village zoning do we have? Because it's kind of concentrated in certain areas that essentially the village is residential, and you other things with it. Because I think you mentioned like a farm, well, this doesn't really affect those types of property.
But no, the thing is that they're already allowed farms.
Right.
And so.
But like, in the village, depending on where you are, you could have 4 houses on an acre. So that's not gonna work unless you build a apartment above a house or something. But, I think we're kind of limited. I mean, the discussion is basically, there's not that many places it's gonna happen anyway.
Right, but I
Unless, we get people that request some zoning changes and that type of thing.
this would basically allow accessory dwelling units or accessory housing in all districts except for, I guess, marine, employment center, and industrial districts.
So we're not just talking about buildings.
No, because it's already allowed in those other districts, but the flexibility that we're talking about, I think, would include for any district that has accessory dwelling units.
Yes. Al?
The only issue that I think I can see with the village would be the parking, even if it can fit it in there. Because your villages are what, Lynch and Still Pond, Morton.
And again, that's one of those conditions that we have, is that you've got to be able to have at least one parking space that is provided in the rear yard. So it's kind of like you have to meet all of these.
I understand, I'm just thinking about the neighbors. If somebody does, that's the biggest thing. The only thing is you're gonna have negative feedback.
Could be.
Typically, or maybe.
Any other task force comments? All right, anyone in the public that would like to comment?
Janet Christensen, Lewis.
Hey, Janet, can you turn on the mic, please?
Janet Christensen, Lewis. Mine is a question. Is the density of the village, it seems to me, is much higher than the other residential areas in which this is allowed or not? Am I incorrect?
So that is correct. But many of our villages do have public water and sewer. Kennedyville, Morton, Fairleigh. So they can support a higher density.
Correct, but in allowing in the village not only to have a high density, but to put an accessory dwelling increases the density to an even higher number. Is that right? That is a density issue in terms of how many, density has not only to do with how many houses, but how many actual residents. It increases, obviously, it doesn't have to, but it can increase traffic, it can increase noise, it can have all kinds of secondary impacts in a place that you already allow for fairly high density in the first place. I'm not arguing for or against, I just think those are issues that have to be discussed.
I agree, and I think that the number of accessory dwelling units that are constructed have a minimal effect. And also, while we allow 4 dwelling units per acre, realized density for most of the subdivisions falls much below that. So even if you do have accessory dwelling units, you're still probably only going to barely get to that 4 unit per acre.
So
Most subdivisions end up with a kind of a 3 or 3.5
once you
once
take
you take
out
out
the
the
roads
roads
and
and
the
the stormwater management and the
forest
forest
conservation.
conservation. So I think the overall effect is not going to be noticeable.
Would
Even
there
for
be,
more houses.
would there be some kind of review of that if densities were starting to get, I mean, you're saying that it wouldn't happen because it's not, people wouldn't do it, and I probably agree with you, but should there be all of a sudden a stress on that, would there be some kind of a review process whereby that would be somehow backed out? I just, I just think residents in the village are expecting a certain amount of density, and then all of a sudden you're adding something, and I just think that has to be considered. I do think accessory dwellings, if they're very limited, have a use, and it does have an impact on affordable housing, particularly with elderly parents, with kids, with what, however you're going to do that. But I also think that it could be an issue for people that are already living in a village that aren't expecting to have a two-story structure built so that somebody else can live there and they have more traffic and noise and all these other things. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Any other comments from the public? I don't know if we have anyone from the public on the phone or online. I don't think so. Okay, so Carla, I think you,
I think that's something to work with. Thank you.
yep, I think you summarized well. Thank you. So I think we can move on to our next topic, reviewing demolition process as it relates to the age of structure. And Bill, you're going to tell us about this?
Yes, I am. Thank you. This staff suggestion raises the issue of how old a structure should be to be considered historic. The county has selected 75 years or older as its default on provisions for photographing buildings to be demolished or established by the land use ordinance. There is a three-tiered process in place, and this doesn't really address those tiers. This just addresses the age of the building. The comprehensive plan does include what I would call a description of regulatory provisions from the zoning code, so it does mention 75 years. Nationally, the standard for consideration of historic significance is generally around 50 years of age. There's some citations there from Maryland Department of Planning's Maryland Historic Trust website. In reviewing this and reflecting on this, this is a staff suggestion. Going through this, we've raised different issues that we thought should be discussed. And in reflecting on this, I think the Historic Preservation Commission really does perform an amazing feat. Their volunteers go out and photograph and document structures that property owners request to have demolished. Currently, with the 75-year-old threshold, there were 56 permits last year, so that's 56 reviews. That's more than 1 week for volunteer organization, and that includes things not just houses, but it's sheds, barns, and really structure. It's a great deal of time for those volunteers and also for staff. And considering the current volume of reviews for demolition permits and the work required, I think that the standard of 75 years appears to be sufficient. I think a higher standard would likely require additional staffing. So upon reflection of this request, staff recommends that the task force consider maintaining the current standard of 75 years in land use ordinance.
Thank you. Comments or questions?
Yep. I have a question, concern you have. When you speak about demolition of a structure, are you talking about, I mean, if somebody going to take off a wing of a structure, or any part of that structure is what we're talking about, or the entire structure?
Yes, sir. Any part. So structures that are 75 years or older get some form of review. Try to photographic review. It's documented for the historic record.
Okay, so if we have one sort of somebody wants to, as an architect, and they want to do, say, pillars on the front of the house, and they want to replace it with a porch or some sort. That needs to go through this process, which will hold up the process of them getting a permit for, the three-tier process, which would go how long?
So the first tier is 30 days, and that's to determine whether or not it needs really extensive photographing. Then the second phase would be 45 days if that occurs. So far, I think we've only done tier 2.
Okay, so the third tier is an older structure.
What happens is, based on certain standards, the Historic Preservation Commission or the department can decide that a more thorough documentation is required based on sort of the value of the building.
So somebody buying a historic structure in Kent County could, and wants to do a modification of that structure, could potentially be looking at a minimum of 75 days before they can even begin to get. Because I get that permission first before they move on to the getting granted. So
It's more hard to turn things around between 2 to 3.
I understand that.
It is possible, yes.
Billy, they can apply for their construction permit at the same time as the demolition permit.
Okay.
So, and we don't have a mechanism to stop demolition, we're just requiring a review.
No, I
So
understand.
they can do it together.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just talking like a time. I mean, if I wanted to go build a brand new house out on, a lot, what's the time frame for getting a permit for that? I mean, how, do we know? I mean, if I came in with my plans tomorrow and asked to build a single-family residential dwelling, in this day and age, how long can I expect it to take me to get the permit?
Without demolition being involved.
Yes. Well, either way, I mean, I'm just asking.
Right, the time period of process permits has gotten longer because we've been short staffed.
Right.
We're hoping that now that we have staff again, that it will speed up a little bit. I think we're currently at, I would guess, 4 weeks.
4 weeks, so we're adding another month minimum on to a historic.
It can be done concurrently.
Yeah. Okay. Is this a question?
Okay. Other questions, Joe?
Bill, what, the Kent County Historic Preservation Commission, have they weighed in on this? And these are experts from different bodies. What are they on?
I have not weighed in on this.
For the part, are they active? I mean, they're not really active in recording it. I understand that
They haven't had a meeting in some time. I would say that, I think part of my position here is they are volunteers who do a lot of work already, and suggesting that we want them to do more work, I was a little hesitant about that, so.
I agree. I think that's what all. I guess my concern there, obviously they're concerned about this, they wouldn't volunteer. I guess I want to make sure they're heard. I think our heritage is critically important.
So does this apply to every single structure or just structures of historical significance? Do we make that distinction, or is it just a blanket designation?
We document every structure that is more than 75 years old.
By definition, that's considered significant or enough documentation.
And then in doing that, we realize that it is a structure of much more significance. That's when we can take it to that next step, the additional detailed documentation. Fortunately, we haven't had too many of those properties that have moved to go to that next step.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the task force?
No. Yeah, so if you had a barn that's 74 years old, you're home free.
Yes, sir.
I mean, and what I'm getting at
So we
is,
can
it's kind of,
validate that.
either there's a difference between a house, a barn, or an old shed that's fallen down, that if you blow on, the wind blows hard, it's gonna fall over anyway. And I can see, does that have historical significance? I mean, we've got an old statement there that I don't even know when it was built. Do you keep records of when that type of stuff is built? I mean, are there records that say, I mean, say, a house, a lot of times a house, well, hey, that house, you can look at it and know it was built back in the 1800s or early 1900s. But,
The historic preservation commission has expertise on it, and they are able to identify age. So we do sort of a rough. We use SStat, we use information from the property owner. We use things to sort of give a rough estimate. If our estimate were we think it's 74 years old, we would probably ask the historic preservation commission to take a look and verify if we're something that looks that we're correct.
I mean,
Sometimes it's on.
I don't know that we want to get into a thing where, I mean, I think their houses and sheds or something like that is different. I don't know if we want to get into a thing of stopping progress, which could very well slow progress, though, particularly on farms. I mean, there's a lot of, you look around in Kent County, there's a lot of new buildings, but a lot of new buildings are where an old building was that was no longer functional. You take an old wagon shed that was only so tall that back in the day you pushed that wagon, you could even get a piece of wood there. It's gone. And most of those, I would say, are probably older than 75 years old. And you would hate to think that we're delaying that while someone looks at it.
Paul, please.
I just like to say, I vote with you. I think the historical structure tier 2 is 30 days. That's really concurrent with where we can get a building permit. So only if it's declared historic significance by the historical committee would you get into that 40-month thing on. The first 30 days really is going to be kind of concurrent with building permit. So I don't think you're holding anything up. We're just getting a better sense of
with that as long as it doesn't become. What happens when you have historical? I mean, there's never a case where they say, well, this is historic, and you can't demo it. Does that ever happen?
We don't have provisions that create
So
that.
stop that. Okay.
Other comments from the?
So this is just a catalog history, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, got it. All right. Well, that answers all my questions.
But it could be different in the city. I mean, I know we don't have jurisdiction over Chestertown, but Chestertown can, I think, stop people from tearing something down.
I can't answer that.
Okay, so, any other comments from the task force on the phone or online?
This is John Leisinger in Chesterville again. This is a particular hobby horse of mine. I'm far less concerned about the 50-year versus 75-year threshold and the requirement to document than I am about comment. I think I just heard from someone saying that we have no ability to prohibit the demolition of any historic structure. And in my 35 years in the county, just within my neighborhood, I've seen 10 buildings of 200 years or more, homes of 200 years or more demolished, without any limitation other than to have to record the structure and to wait the prerequisite number of days. And I'm not sure that this is the right forum, the task force, to set up new rules, but I think that's disgraceful. These are assets to our county, which once gone, are gone forever. And my view is that while these structures may be expensive to repair, they're rarely prohibitively expensive to repair, and owners should be required to, at very least, preserve the structure, if not renovate them. So, so I'm sorry, I didn't hear what was just said, but my strong belief is that we are wasting one of the county's most precious assets. We don't have more restrictions than we currently have with regard to the demolition of structures. It's understandable that people would want to modify their structures, modernize them, And that certainly should be permitted within limits short of demolition. But the least of my concerns is that whether the threshold should be 50 years or 75 years. Perhaps you should think of a separate provision in which structures of, let's say, more than 100 years or more than 150 years may not be demolished without some special procedures, which would prove that the buildings could not be salvaged in any way. I'm sorry. If this is not the right forum for that, but I've seen too much of it over the years, and we've lost a significant percentage of our heritage, which does not benefit us from a tourism point of view or simply aesthetic and heritage point of view.
Thank you, John. Other comments or questions from the public?
Cindy gets off. Cindy gets her.
Oh, Cindy gets. Sorry, Cindy, I don't see you.
That's okay. I just wanted to weigh in and say I support maintaining the 75-day or the 75-year time frame and not going to 50. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Jen.
I think the question is just between 50 and 75. I do support 75, but I also have to tag on to John Leisinger's comment. You know, if you read the comprehensive plan, one of the things that we have asked for is adaptive reuse of buildings. And the historic structures that we have in King County not only are important because they're old, but they support tourism. They make King County unique. It's part of our cultural landscape. They sit in the landscape as they were many years ago. King County is one of the few places where you have a cultural landscape that is pretty much unchanged. You know, there's been additions, but basically it's an unchanged landscape. And I just want to say that the Historic Preservation Committee not only documents, but they go into, they talk to the owners, and they have, in some instances, been able to convince owners not to demolish. Because if you get that structure under a program as a historic structure, there is a million grants and both state and federal grants that are available for rehab. And I would just say that any architect that would buy an older home would probably not be the first architect that's starting to tear things down. So I don't think that that is a problem. And I don't think what we have now is not onerous on owners. They just have to go through a process with development and have somebody that's knowledgeable speak to them about the historic structure and how to keep it in the landscape.
Thank you. Oh, please. You could just state your name in the microphone.
Okay. My name's Ford Hall, and my comment on the historic structure is, if you make the conditions too onerous, you're going to run into a problem with demolition by neglect. I mean, people are just going to turn their back on the structure and just let it fall apart. So anyway, that was my one comment.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience that wants to speak? Tom?
Yeah. And I want to comment to John Leislinger's remarks there. We own a farm that joins his property. Well, he had approached me. There's an old barn, an old shed that he wanted to get rid of those. He wanted me to sell this part of the property to him that he would make, and which would have all been very nice. But we're talking about property there that's, I don't know, probably, I don't know how old it is, 150? I mean, it's all fall down, it's good, you never use it again for anything. I don't have any intentions to do anything with it. The only thing I thought is call some of those people that buy old lumber an old barn that we used to grate something. But I just found it ironic that here it's all right to get rid of that, but it's not all right to get rid of something else. And that's the only comment I just think we've got to be careful in what how we approach this. I mean, like I say, I don't have any problem with the barn. He does because it's unsightly. It's there next to his property, which is a very nice property. But it's been there for years, and it'll eventually fall down. That's what's happening to it.
I'm sorry, Tom. I was not referring to that property at all.
Well, no, and I wasn't saying it first, but I just found it ironic that something else is being stored and something else.
Well, let's stay to the agenda item, I think, which we're talking about the threshold of 50 or 75. And I think we all agree 75 is appropriate. All right. Thank you. So it's 5:07, so why don't we take it's almost 5:07. Why don't we take a 10-minute break or so? So adjourn, come back at 7:15, and if you're online, remember to mute yourself, or we hear you. And we'll see you at 7:15.
And also, just to note, we don't turn off the live stream, and we don't turn off the YouTube. So the mics are on, if anything said in this room.
Yeah, thank you.
He did something. He signed up. If you wanted to make a comment
What's that?
I'm just curious.
Okay.
It's a separate thing.
Yeah, oh yeah, I knew that, but I just didn't know. That, when it said that, I'm using that's so false.
Yeah. Don't even have to. And that's what it is. Maybe 100%. And that's the hit back. And that house is actually like going down the lot and there's a few other feet of the road. Right. Okay, okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, you're gonna, this doesn't show me. I know. Whatever question.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, 17. Folks on the phone or online, we're gonna go back into the meeting. I don't see any of you.
You can hear me now, right?
I can hear you.
Good.
All right, is anyone else online? We are reconvening. I'm going to move forward discussing short-term vacation rentals. Representative Bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This request is to consider whether to regulate short-term vacation rentals in the land use ordinance. Currently, the county has chosen not to regulate short-term vacation rentals via zoning and does not currently address them in the land use ordinance. The county does levy taxes on such uses, and the forms, related laws, and state regulations attached. There are, on average, about 65 properties that pay the tax.
I'm sorry, if you could mute, I don't know who you are, but someone on the phone, if you could please mute, we can hear you.
And there are about 16 plus or minus of those 65 properties in the unincorporated county. I promise that the county team will be working towards some approximate figures for this meeting, and Jimmy Williams is here, and I believe has some numbers that she can share with us. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, we did try to do some research on the VRO sites as well as the Airbnb sites. It looks like there are about 50 of those, and we can compare them, but about 50 or so of those, and they are concentrated in the town of Chestertown as well as Rock Hall. We have, and this is the one thing that we need to work on, you know, internally. We've got 45 listed in our visitors guide, 40 listed on our website, but yet we have 65 properties actually paying the tax. So we need to kind of reconcile that. But we do believe there are some entities out there not submitting the tax as they should. The process at the county level is if we know that someone is doing short-term rentals with their property, the Office of Finance sends out a letter with the form and the code and all the information that they need to start to do that. But there currently is no enforcement on the county side.
Thank you.
So, do we have any idea of how much revenue is generated from this, tax dollars from this? No.
No, because a rental they could be on the market for one weekend, a year, let's say Tea Party, and they just want it on there for Tea Party, or it could be 365 days. You have no idea.
Yeah, but we don't know, okay, so you're taxed each time you rent the property out.
You're supposed to be, as the owner, you're supposed to be charging the tax and remitting it to Kent County.
Okay.
So Bill, did you have more to add?
Yes, ma'am.
Please.
So
Turn
we,
back to Bill.
Carla did some looking out in the community and found some regulations that Talbot uses. They're very, very detailed. And they have established a licensing program for short-term vacation rentals. I think that from a review of it, it's included in your packet. It seems it's really quite detailed. And our conclusion is that overall regulating this kind of use does require detailed regulations and the ability of staff to do routine enforcement. I had touched base with Stevens County, and they don't directly regulate short-term vacation rentals, similar to the way we don't.
So I would say,
Bill, are you finished?
I was just going to add that the comprehensive plan does not appear to address short-term vacation rentals, and not all matters need to be addressed by the zoning regulations as well. There have been complaints of which I'm aware of, and those that have occurred or might be able to be addressed by a noise ordinance. Typically, that's not something handled in zoning. I would say that would be handled in another section of public laws. Traffic can also be an issue, and that would remain unaddressed if we weren't to address short-term rentals. But staff recommends the task force consider not addressing short-term short-term vacation rentals in the land use ordinance as it stands.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Sam.
I would have to agree that I don't particularly see the need to address short-term regulations in the land use ordinance. I would, however, just make the comment that we really do need to ensure that whatever home that appears on VRBO or Airbnb is, I guess, registered with the county and is paying their accommodation taxes. Because if they're not paying their accommodations tax, they're essentially undercutting our B&Bs, our inns, and our hotels, who typically have paid staff and are paying accommodations taxes to the county. So I think it's a terribly unfair advantage on those operations who are not registered and paying accommodations taxes. And I think that's really the extent of how we should regulate them, just to ensure that they're registered and are paying their accommodations tax.
Any other comments or questions from the task force? Our friends on the phone, James?
Hey.
Frank.
I agree with Sam that it's not fair to those that pay the taxes. The whole problem is in how we enforce this, or how do we find out who those people are? I mean, it's basically going to have to be, my neighbors rented his place out this week.
Right.
And you know, that's the problem. But I agree with you, it's not fair to those who play by the rules. And everyone should play by the rules.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, though, isn't there something to where you can rent your home for 2 weeks and not have to pay taxes. You know, I mean, I know that's done, you know, the ocean, some will own a condo, and just rent it for 2 weeks, they don't go through a agency or anything, and it's lawful, they can do that.
Well, if you're doing that outside of a platform, I think that's fine. But if you're using a platform like Airbnb or VRBO, then the intent is you are renting or leasing to. I mean, that speaks directly towards, you know, treating your house like an inn.
So like I say, how do we enforce this?
Right.
How do we, outside of the, you know, the community's gonna have to do that. And then,
So, I mean, when we're when we're browsing these sites, you know, Jamie just mentioned that they have all of them listed in. That seems like a pretty one way. My only concern is, I mean, to your point about enforcing, if we see they list their home on VRBO, we send them this letter to register and pay their accommodations tax, and they just throw it in the trash. There's no teeth to that. It's more of a recommendation rather than an actual mandate. So
I guess just backing up though, do we think this is a land use ordinance issue? And that's the gist of it. I mean, it may have to be regulated, I just don't know if it is a land use issue.
right.
Joe?
I don't put anyone's spot, but I see Mayor Paul's draft. I'm just curious how Chestertown handles this issue. If you don't mind, I need to bother.
No, thank you. I basically want to reiterate what Sam Shoge has said. This is an issue that has been troubled Chestertown for quite some time, and we have appealed to the county for assistance on it. And as Sam says, this unenforced regulations are penalizing the good guys. They really are. We've got a number of people who run in effect small hotels who are registered, pay the fees, and we're penalizing them. And that's just not fair. As to enforcement, now, occasionally somebody's renting just to their friends, but when somebody's advertising over the internet, that's not done in secret. That's easy to track people down that way. And then the only way to regulate it is through zoning. And maybe that's the case. Maybe what Commissioner Mason is saying, and can't think of another way to enforce it. If somebody is running a business out of their home and the home is not zoned for a business, you find a way to enforce that. And the penalties are pretty severe. So I see no reason why, if it comes down to it, that the only way to enforce it is to put it under zoning, let's put it under zoning. But we need to solve this problem. We really do. Just recently, people have bought the Horsey's house there on Biker Court. This was quite a large house, and it is run through Airbnb on a daily basis. 5, 6 cars there. We can't afford just to ignore this. We really would look to the county to help us in any way they can. It's vitally important to us.
Thank you. Paul?
I would just like to say, early on in this meeting, we were talking about accessory uses and building apartments. You're now creating the ability to now have your short-term rentals. So you're going to have to create some way of enforcing and overseeing how it's done. I personally, I don't think it's a land use thing. I do believe it's going to have to be left up to both the town and the county. Let's call them politicians or whatever, commissioners, town board, whatever. They'd like to get together and figure out how to put some teeth into that, into some ordinance to get true control. Because again, we're creating departments, we're creating the ability to do these, the exception buildings. The short-term loans, you mentioned, you want to be rentals. You want to create the ability, create a way to oversee it.
Thank you, Paul. Bill, question, do we know beyond Queen Anne's County? I mean, I know what happens in like a larger city like New York, and it is regulated by the city. Um, do we know what other communities are doing, since I could see this being a problem? You know, I'm sure it's an emerging issue for a lot of counties beyond our reach.
Right, and I didn't do a little survey. In the staff report, I included a reference to American Planning Association's report. They studied New Orleans as a model, as a large city, and it was a large enforcement program. And we talked about some of the pitfalls, et cetera. So there are examples we can look to. Generally, those require quite a bit of staffing. That's generally the linchpin that makes it work is paid eyes and time.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to just invite folks on the task force online or on the phone that want to comment. Excuse me. Cindy, do you want to comment?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I understand we had to raise our hands, so there you go. I'm done. I don't believe that short-term rentals should be a land use ordinance concern at this point. I don't believe that, number one. Number two, I understand that VRBO and Airbnb have, they have the ability to collect taxes to which the owners need to submit those taxes on a quarterly basis. So I think it's just a matter of making sure that, in fact, our the lodging taxes that are being collected as far as Airbnb and VRBO are concerned are being reported and sent in to the county. But I do not think this is a land use ordinance issue. That's my comment.
Thank you, Cindy. And Tyler, I see that you've come online. Would you like to comment? Tyler, we can't hear you. I think you're muted.
No, I didn't have a comment.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to do the task force first and then we'll move to the public. Anyone else?
Well, yes. I think it's very important that we don't regulate it too much, although I sympathize with what Sam's saying is correct. But as far as I know, King County is perceived as a pretty nice tourist area. I mean, we thrive on tourism here. And there is a very limited amount of hotel rooms, and some of them aren't even, they might be counted as hotel rooms, but I wouldn't stay in them. But there is a need for it, and it brings people to the county. And to get people coming to the county and spending dollars. So I think if you start regulating it and putting it in land ordinance and whatever, let these platforms collect the tax money and follow them instead of creating more jobs or more work for the local zoning people. But I think you're going to shoot yourself in the foot if you don't allow it. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Bill. Members of the audience that would like to comment?
I just want us to remember that if this becomes part of the land use ordinance, then that would only be pertain to the short-term rentals in the county. The town would still have the issue that they're having, and 80 to 85% of them are in the municipality of Chestertown and Mount Hall. So we just need to keep that in mind. One thing we do is we do check the sites, and we do send out letters when we know that one's not on there. The other thing is if we know that someone is not remitting lodging tax, they are not listed in our business directory, to try to make sure that our businesses that are collecting and remitting are getting, the most publicity that we can give them.
Just a question, do you have any responses when you send the letters out?
And that's the hard part, Kim, is kind of connecting that with what comes in, because it comes to the Office of Finance. We do get a report. Have we done a good job of matching that up? No, just haven't had the time to do that.
Thank you. Shelley?
Thank you. Shelley Heller. I do have a little bit more information that perhaps could shed some light on the subject. At MACO, we discuss this often. How can we address it legislatively at the state level? It seems to be that the most effective way to handle it is through the land use ordinance, because you can require them to have a permit. And how restrictive you want to be with the requirements would really be up to the jurisdiction. So you could either say, simply apply for an annual permit and the only requirement is proving that you paid the lodging tax. Or you could say it's going to require Department of Health inspections on the kitchen, it's going to require, blah, 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 you have to be zoned in these districts, etc. So that's up to the jurisdiction to determine how much you want to impose on that. But the only way to effectively collect the tax so that there is teeth is to put something that would require them to have a permit to be able to operate. I don't know of a jurisdiction where if it's on the county's books, it also applies to the towns. That's all in the state of Maryland anyway. It's separate. The towns have their rules and regulations, and the county have theirs. And as for collecting it directly from Airbnb and VRBO, what we have found is they will negotiate with counties such as Montgomery, where there's a lot of traction, a lot of units, but they won't even talk to the smaller jurisdictions. They're not interested in collecting the tax. They're not interested in coming up with an arrangement where they're going to send, Kent County $42.83 in a quarter. So that's just food for thought on the subject.
It's very helpful. Thank you.
So by doing nothing, we're ultimately saying that short-term rentals are permitted outright in all of our zoning districts, by essentially saying we're not going to take on regulating them, right? Okay.
Well, I guess the question for me is that, in light of Shelley's additional research, do you think it is a land use ordinance issue, or do we want it to be a land use ordinance issue?
If it wasn't, what would it be?
It's nothing.
No, what I'm saying, but could we talk to Buck and say it's a law enforcement issue? I know they only give you that. Right. What I'm saying, there's no other direction we can go with it.
I mean, I
The simplest thing is to require a home occupation. And if we become aware of one, then we say, we've got to come with a use permit for your home occupation. But I don't know, I have to look at the ordinance to see if the standards that we have for home occupations would allow for the rental of properties where the homeowner obviously owns that.
Right.
I mean, that's probably the hang up.
So Shelley's suggestion that it be simple and you request that it's someone registers. I mean, do we still have to get into the home occupation?
I don't think Bill has something to say. He's done most of the research on this.
I would just, for all civil approach, perhaps we just have a use where we have many uses, and a use would be short-term vacation rental, requiring that the tax be paid, some language of that, and then that's just a use inserted into certain zoning districts. Wherever it appears that it's permitted, wherever it doesn't appear, it's not permitted. Same way with any other use. So we certainly draft that up, and maybe there's some areas where it's not desirable. Maybe it's just a use added to each zoning district, and then that language about paying the taxes is there, that it's subject to zoning violation, daily fines, if not.
Right. So that seems the simplest. And then the towns would have to adopt something by themselves.
Right. It would only apply to unincorporated properties. Yeah.
I feel as if that's treading a very fine line, especially considering how the general consensus seems, we don't want to overly regulate or create too many burdens. My only issue is, they really should be paying their accommodations taxes. And if this is the only way that we can actually enforce the collection of accommodations taxes, then I would say what Bill proposed is likely the most feasible and most efficient scenario. It has some teeth. We collect the accommodations taxes. Everything is kosher, or as much as it can be.
And as we've heard, though, 85% of these rentals are happening in the counties, right? Right. So I think it covers the county, but.
Yeah, I think I agree. We know a minimal effort to protect our ongoing businesses that play live roles and what most people stated. And I think if the county took the lead here, it would probably support the towns too. And there's the benefit would be to be outside of, everyone collecting the same, whatever those fees are for similar properties. Everyone's going to have the percent of tax that is help support Jamie's shop there and send a message to the people that want to operate. I would think it would be a minimal permit process at the outset.
Oh, just want to say that would certainly help us.
Just ask folks to speak in the microphone. I'm afraid others can't hear. It's fine. Any other comments or questions?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Cindy.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that the example that planning staff included from the Talbot County Code, that is under short-term rentals are in the list of accessory uses in the Talbot County Land Use Ordinance. So that's where they add the provision that a license is required and all the specifications for what they want to happen with those short-term rentals. So the task force can look through that and see exactly, what does the county want to regulate? And I also looked up in the town of Chestertown that an ordinance was passed in April of 2020, a new chapter in their code 138 for the registration of short-term rental units. And so we can look at that too, maybe, and see what exactly the county wants to regulate and do with the licensing and or registration if it's going to be included in the land use ordinance.
Thank you. Jen.
So I'll email that out.
Do you have any more task force members that want to speak?
Any other task force members? Comments, questions? Okay, hearing none, Jen, please.
Thanks, Jen Lewis. I just want to say, I think that there's some balance here as all the comments have come forward. There's certainly a way to find a way forward. I think there's no way that you can address this. And it probably is a land use ordinance in terms of I don't think we need inspections. I don't think we need to make it onerous. I don't think we need to do any of those things. But you've got to go for some sort of regulation to protect other landowners. I mean, if somebody's going to have an Airbnb next to you, you get a say in what's going on there. I mean, it can't just be a free-for-all. And so something somewhere needs to be done to address these issues, particularly, again, because we're allowing more accessory dwellings, which increases the amount of dwellings in the county that could possibly be people eyeing those as sources of income. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay. So, moving on, are there any requests for research? Additional research? Do we still need this on the agenda, or do we, by virtue of the questionnaire, right? We know that we want to discuss almost everything. And we need more information. I'm sorry. And you are giving us the readings by telling us where to go. So I think we can eliminate those remarks.
I just had one comment that's about tonight, and I was glad to see so many more persons of our task force in person. And I think that's what we're looking for. We have get to see everybody and get to actually know them a little better. And also, it seems to be everyone's participation. It's a little difficult, you know, for Cindy's up there with her hand raised, but we are actually still. So anyway, I was happy to see more people participate and more people from the public. That's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, if you're comfortable coming in person, we welcome you. And if you're not, we will continue to have hybrid meetings. So we want to make it as inclusive as possible. So unless Bill, is there anything else, Barbara?
I would only say that based on our schedule, in 2 weeks, we're going to start talking about the environmental issues. And we'll have some staff reports to start delving into that information.
Okay. So with no other issues, I make a recommendation that we adjourn.
So moved.
Okay. So we'll see you all in 2 weeks.